Here's the thing I think about Ethan Klein. He's a bitch. He's a bitch, and if I see him in public, oh, I swear to God, I'm just gonna say, "Hey, what the hell, man?"
Oh my God, my hair is so bad.
Oh, it looks great. It looks great. I just got a haircut, so it's, don't compare. It's not fair.
Yeah, I am overdue.
Uh,
Well, anyway, I wanted to reach out because I was watching the content nuke that Ethan Klein released, and I've been covering Ethan Klein for a long time, and he's had, I think, like a major issue that I've been having with his content is the incessant conflation between Zionism and Jewish Zionists in
Judaism.
Israel and then Judaism altogether. And I just had a moment where I was watching this hit piece that he did on Hassan, and in the hit piece, Hassan makes a comment about how the Houthis are they have good music videos and Israel's been real quiet since it's dropped, like obviously a joke. And then Ethan
Right.
says that, oh, you think Israel's been quiet about this? You think Jews don't have any kind of culture that they can talk about? And then he starts playing like a music video of Jewish kids dancing and like just a really gross conflation between Jewish culture and the actions that Israel's been doing in kind of their genocidal expansion. Um,
Right.
the reason I wanted to reach out to you about that is because I've heard you talk about that very thing specifically. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm personally not Jewish. Uh, what has your experience been on that? Have you experienced a lot of people doing that in your personal life? Because we see it all the time online.
You mean my experience of people like actually conflating
Right.
Israel and Jews? Um, the majority of times that I see someone conflating all Jews and Israel, it's a Zionist doing it.
Okay.
And I would say that like I've seen that on the left occasionally with people who I would say are like newly woke on Palestine. And for the most part, there was a time where I didn't take anyone in good faith, where in fact I was afraid to really engage with people who weren't Jewish and talking about this stuff, mostly because you have no way of knowing what's in someone's like heart, right?
Right.
So my fear was always that like they secretly might harbor some anti-Semitic feelings. Like, why is this so important to you?
Yeah.
That was like how I used to feel about it. Um, but then I would find myself like I would find myself judging people who I essentially agreed with, like almost 100%, um, and just like not giving them the benefit of the doubt because I had these reservations about, well, what if they are secretly anti-Semitic? And eventually it just felt like tone policing. And I
Mm.
realized that's kind of what I was doing. Like I was just tone policing people who were in good faith, maybe a little bit ignorant about what the right terms are to use. What you're supposed to say, what you're not supposed to say. It felt like I was just finding a way in which to make this a completely insular conversation. Um,
Okay.
and so yeah, so there was a time where I could like when I see Ethan Klein talking about this stuff, I
Hmm.
recognize myself as like a in my early 20s. You know what I mean? Like I see myself in there where he wants credit for not being like a foaming at the mouth Zionist. But
Right.
at the same time he falls into um a lot of the traps, like whether it's a semantic trap or it's just a mindset that just continues to reinforce Zionism and continues to advocate for it, even if it's not directly like, I believe in, annexing the West Bank and
Yeah.
Gaza, like you don't need to say that in order to um, be someone who is going to allow that to happen. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Because I think
yeah,
there's like different levels of Zionism, and Ethan is
Mm.
he has said that I'm against the genocide that's
Uh,
going on, I'm against Netanyahu,
mhm.
I'm against the settlers, but
Right.
he still has a level of Zionism that's apparent to me because he's
Mhm.
never actually addressed the underlying ethno state that Israel exists under.
Right. He refuses to he refuses to examine Zionism. He is one of these people who, like many other liberal Zionists before him, uh, refuse to settle on a like practical definition of Zionism to what like the results of Zionism are. You can, pontificate all day about what Zionism means to you, and
Hmm.
that doesn't matter. I don't care what it means to you. I care about what the results of Zionism are for the people that are, under its boot. Like that to me is the number one issue. Like what is the result of Zionism? And the result of Zionism is you know, decades and decades of occupation, apartheid, genocide and death. It's like this is not something where you can be like, well, I have personal feelings about this word that I grew up hearing. And it's like, yeah, feel free to have your own personal definition, but don't police the people who are discussing the reality on the ground. That's just my feeling about it.
Yeah, right. And because when we talk about Zionism, it does seem like there's that kind of underlying cause that Ethan is unwilling to address. And there's all of these like external factors that he's talking about, such as like
Hmm.
he says that there is a genocide and they should stop their
Hmm.
military campaign in Gaza. But then he also will talk about how if you're criticizing Israel or you're criticizing Zionists, that is a criticism of Jewish people. And so
Right.
it seems to me like his effective rhetoric is almost running a defense for Israel in that regard, because when
Yeah.
a lot of your criticism is aimed at people that are criticizing the actions of Israel, and the
Hmm.
tool you're using to criticize them is by saying that you're actually just criticizing Jewish culture, that
Right.
seems like you're de facto defending the actions that this state is
That
taking.
yeah, he can, like I think he believes that he is um like not a Zionist or good or whatever. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know what he believes. Um, I think because of the fact that early on he was talking about with Hassan, at least I've only seen like some of his shit. Like
Hmm.
I'm not someone who really watches him.
Yeah, you're not missing
Um,
much.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it looks awful. But what I mean by that is that it looks like he is not having fun, which I don't understand the point of a stream if you're not having fun. But anyways, like I can't say what he believes. I don't know what he believes, but all I can do is look at what his actions are signaling. And his actions are all in defense of the status quo when it comes to the way people engage with this topic, which is to immediately call out everything anti Semitic that is criticizing Israel or Zionism or Israelis, um, and to try to use any sort of lever of influence that you have at your disposal to silence those critics or punish them or blacklist them. To me, that's what I'm seeing. I see him trying to, deplatform people who have, barely any platform to begin with, people like Frogan, right? Um, or I see him trying to lead a concerted effort to get people like Hassan, banned or punished or whatever,
Yeah.
lose money, lose sponsorships. And it's all based on what he says is like, the anti-Semitism that he has created, around him. Um, but I think it's kind of clear that when it comes to Hassan, I think it's personal. I think
Oh,
I think
it,
he's jealous of Hassan's ability to talk about this stuff in a way that people listen. And I think with him, he's mad that the things he's saying um are, not in line with things that Ethan believes himself. So he's like, and in fact, they're quite the opposite of it. So he's like looking at someone who was once a friend, um, getting more and more clout, getting more and more famous,
Hmm.
and realizing that like he can't get this person um, to say things like to like be the person who he is, who Ethan is, who's someone who's
Yeah.
like and so sensitive to the idea that something might be anti-Semitic that the conversation just shouldn't happen. That's what Ethan wants. He doesn't want the conversation to happen because he is he claims he's worried about anti-Semitism. But I also think it's again it's personal. He's married to an Israeli.
I mean,
He's
you're a pretty good judge of character because Ethan has literally said that, like, oh, that beef with Hassan, that's more of a personal thing. When his producer was encouraging to like reach out to people to crush beefs, and then he's like, that's more of a personal thing, so I'm not going to like reach out to Hassan. And then also
yeah.
when you're talking about how he's like trying to get Hassan to change, and he's realizing that he doesn't really have any kind of leverage to get Hassan to change. There was like this one
Right.
moment in the last conversation Ethan had with Hassan online. Ethan's like, I concede on everything. Why can't you just concede on some things? So there's also
Right.
that aspect of it's like,
Right.
why aren't you willing to like change your positions on these things, Hassan? Um,
Right. And I think it's got to be frustrating because what Hassan has that Ethan doesn't have is like the ability to communicate the reasoning behind his thinking, the reasoning
mhm.
behind his opinions. Hassan already has these opinions. Hassan been talking about Palestine for a while before October 7th, and I think Ethan is new to it. He's newer to it, so he doesn't understand. He's like, I'm learning things from you. Why won't you learn things from me? And it's
Yeah,
because, well, Ethan, you don't know anything about this. I think all you have is your emotional experience when it comes to this. You have your own personal lived experience, individual experience, and that it's not that that means nothing, but it's also all you have is your preformed biases, and you can't be mad at someone who's actually thought about this for a while.
right.
That's why aren't you listening to me, the world's biggest dumbass? Like, come on, man. maybe because maybe because maybe because every point you're bringing up is something Hassan has addressed and thought of and dealt with. Like, I mean, I don't know because I don't watch. Um, I haven't watched I watched one Hassan and Ethan thing.
Oh, okay.
It was that leftovers episode in which Ethan was crying, and I remember
Mm,
thinking that it was kind of a beautiful episode because they were both very emotional about it, and it was nice to see. I'd only kind of known Ethan as like an internet guy, and I was like, it's nice to see them, like talking about this and being
yeah.
real about it and emotional, and then a few months later, I heard that they hated each other, or at least Ethan hated Hassan, and I was like, this sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it has grown and from a personal beef into something where Ethan's been kind of finding any kind of ammunition that he can get his hands on to launch at
He's
Hassan, which is why
yeah,
he's now attacking like Hassan for being a communist and running defense
right.
for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it all just seems kind of it does seem like, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
It's like he's and honestly, I personally don't have um like I don't really care so much that he attacks Hassan because I think Hassan is a big boy and can take care
Hmm.
of himself. My issue, I don't even care that he whether or not he may or may not be a Zionist. Like he can struggle with that publicly and private. I don't give a fuck. I have too
Yeah.
many of people like that in my life. I don't need another one. My issue with him has always been, and the only reason I covered it on my show is because he is doing the he's doing hasbara is because he's doing misinformation because he is oh no, did my camera freeze?
It did, and it's giving me a
Yeah.
thumbs up.
Yeah, so I don't know what this is, but occasionally if for some reason, if I do a thumbs up, sometimes it freezes the camera. It like makes a thumbs up. Here, I'm gonna try something.
Well, it's a very positive image to freeze on.
Okay, I have to not do a thumbs up to the camera. I did.
Um,
I was doing it. Just my thumb came out.
so I think we were talking about like your issue with Ethan isn't that he's a Zionist, it's not that he's attacking Hassan, and then I think we kind of like cut out before you actually got to
Yes.
what your issue with him was.
Yeah. No, my issue. I don't care that he's struggling with his personal definition of Zionism. I don't care that he's doing internet drama. None of that concerns me. Why I covered it on my show is because he was actively trying to get people deplatformed, not just
Hmm.
Hassan, but smaller people. And I think the first time I even talked about this was Frogan's episode.
Yeah, I
Um,
watched that one.
and this is my issue with it is that it's like you can't pretend that you are pro-Palestine, and then uh, also spend the vast majority of your time with regards to this issue trying to deplatform people, trying to use different levers of power and influence, trying to get the ADL to contact Twitch to make it impossible to say any meaningful critique of Israel, like being like, oh, we're going to get these people deplatformed. We're going to make it so you can't say Zionist on Twitch. To me, that's the type of shit that I talk about on my
Yeah,
show.
for sure.
That's the type of shit. Talk about like the propaganda, and we also talk about the way in which speech is curtailed when it comes to criticizing Israel, and that's what Ethan is doing. So he can say, "Oh, I said it was a genocide. I said it was apartheid. Why are you calling me a Zionist?" And it's like because you're doing the heavy lifting. You're making it impossible for other people to say it. In fact, you are actively punishing people for saying it because they didn't conform to whatever, personal parameters that you believe should be universal that you
Hmm.
have with regards to your own sensitivity around the issue. Like that's the whole thing is everyone has their own personal definitions and personal borders and like, boundaries when it comes to this shit. I remember being younger and being like we should just stop using the word Zionism. I feel like
Yeah.
the problem is that like here's how you can talk about Israel without being anti-Semitic. And I like uh, made a note one time. I was like writing this out for myself one time, and I realized that I'd created a list of boundaries that like things that are like, well, this is allowed, but this isn't allowed. This is allowed, but you can't say it like this. You can say these words together, but not this word within. It was like a fucking formula, and it only applied to me. It's my personal
I feel
formula, and
like
I'm
you should
pretending like,
publish that.
yeah, yeah, I really should. I really should. um, and yeah, it was like I had just come to a point where, I yeah, I guess eventually I realized that's what I was doing. What I was doing was trying to get everyone else to conform to what I considered to be the right way to talk about it. And that's what Ethan's doing. And the difference is I was a young little dumbass and had no influence or power. So
Right.
I couldn't get anyone to fucking follow my rules. And I kind of like had to humble myself about, well, what am I doing? I'm scared of people who agree with me. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas like Ethan believes he is right because if he wasn't someone who wasn't always right, why would he be a famous YouTube guy? He's like he's
Hmm.
bought into his own hype. Like I can't be wrong. I have fans.
And it's
And
almost like that like fallacy of expertise where Ethan
yeah,
is like an expert in YouTube drama and he thinks he can parlay that into political matters and he just really doesn't have kind of
yeah.
the base to allow himself to talk informatively about these things.
And he doesn't have the humility
Right,
to
that too.
engage with these issues in any way that is, um, and I mean, because he would have to admit that like his worldview is wrong. He would have to admit that his wife um, was part of a terrorist organization. That's hard to admit. It's hard to admit that like your worldview on something so central to your family, even if it's not Ethan when he was young. I don't think he was an Israeli. He was, I think, an American Jew, right? He's not Israeli. He's
Yeah,
Israeli in that
I
he
don't think
has,
he is.
yeah, but he has Israeli citizenship, I believe someone said, because he and his wife are married and his wife is Israeli, yada yada yada. But it's his family. It's his wife, it's his kids, it's all that stuff. And I think it's hard to confront that. And that's the thing that Hasbara has been the most successful at, is keeping all of those people being like, well, don't worry. You don't need anybody else. All you need is people within, the warm embrace of ethno state, of our ethno state, so like all the news you can follow is stuff that reinforces your worldview and your Zionism.
No,
All of
yeah.
the creators you watch will all agree with you that you're right. You were right the whole time.
Hmm.
Israel good, Palestine bad. Um, so yeah.
No, that's really interesting because I've been talking a lot about how Palestinians aren't the perfect victim. They
Hmm.
have resisted. They have used violence
Hmm.
in resistance. They do have extremist groups that are
Hmm.
representing them, like it or not. They're represented on the global stage by Hamas. And then also their allies are like extremist groups, especially in the eyes of the US government, and how Iran seems to kind of be the source of all evils. So we've been talking a lot about how Palestinians aren't the perfect victim, um, but what you're
Hmm.
talking about, how pro-Palestinian voices might not be the perfect advocate, that's kind of something that I haven't really considered before, but it makes a lot of sense how Ethan is almost looking for, Ethan and just Zionists in general, people that are advocating against the rights of Palestinians in general,
Hmm.
are looking for kind of any little weakness in pro-Palestinian advocacy that they can
Yes.
point to kind of discredit everything that the person is saying.
100%. And it's some people, you know some people I think engage with it in good faith. I feel like a lot of people are victims of it for the most part. Like I know a lot of people who are victims of it. What I mean by that is they are being preyed on by the Hasbaristas, the people who are
Mm,
making the Hasbara.
right.
And they are being fed a steady dose of fear about anti-Semitism, on college campuses, and anti-Semitism, like on the internet and in leftist spaces and in real life, and so they're constantly looking around at the world, and being like, a lot of people hate Jews, which is like, it's not untrue that like like
Hmm.
anti-Semitism exists.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll get anyone on the left to say anti-Semitism doesn't exist. But you will get people who will maybe minimize it, and you can, decide for yourself whether or not that's right or wrong. But if you should listen to the critique, um, and see if it makes sense to you. Like when someone minimizes anti-Semitism, um, quote unquote, um, I'm always wondering where they're coming from. And for the most part, in leftist spaces, it's not that they're minimizing it, it's that they're prioritizing people who are actively being genocided. And
Yeah.
they're saying, like, I understand you might be concerned, but there are people who are being bombed right now. Right now, there are, however many thousands upon thousands of dead children in Gaza. Maybe you're concerned for yourself in the center of empire in America, in which Jews are, a more protected class than, say, people of color in the United States. Maybe your concern should be put, put in order of most urgent, let's say.
Yeah.
And but I feel for some of these people, because I see that they don't want to engage at all, because they have been scared into this trauma response that they've been experiencing now for 16 months.
Right.
where they are told, "Don't forget what happened on October 7th," as if as if that is when this entire conflict began.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's obviously an extremely difficult situation for Jewish people because when the majority of the conversation is framed as Jews versus Muslims, really.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think especially in America, there is this view of this is like a religious thing.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. Yeah.
I always go back to like the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode of Palestinian Chicken, and
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's like that was like my first exposure to kind of like, oh, I guess it's
Perfect.
just like Jews and Palestinians don't like each other. Like I guess that's
Right.
just the way it is.
Right.
Um, and then also there has been like a huge, especially since October 7th, when I feel like um, Israel really started going into overdrive on kind of equating Judaism to to like Zionism and their
Hmm.
expansion policies there, where
Hmm.
you do kind of get like I can totally see how there's this pushback now where if you are seeing Jewish iconography, you could easily assume, oh, this is like a pro-genocide thing. And I
Right.
think that's really the danger of equating Judaism to the ethno state of Israel.
Yes. Exactly. And it's this is one of the reasons why I talk about this is, it's like there's the I'd like to pretend like it's all selflessness, but I don't know if I didn't like grow up, I grew up secular, but grew up with Jewish culture in a
Hmm.
Jewish neighborhood, and um, grew up with Israel as being my country, all this stuff. And then later went on to realize like the programming behind it. Like if I were just like a regular, white Christian, I don't know if I would have cared so much. And it's one of the reasons that I care so much is because I'm like, I do care about anti-Semitism, and I see Israel as being like the top exporter of anti-Semitism
Yeah,
in my lifetime. They're like by far in terms of like what is actually dangerous to the Jewish community. I'm like, well, certainly a country that claims to represent all of us and says, claims that we are all in lockstep behind it, claims that any attack on it is an attack on me, and also says, fuck the world. I don't give a fuck what you think. That's scary for all of us. You're making everybody look bad,
yeah,
and this is it's not an inconsistent thing to say like, oh, I cared about anti-Semitism and now I don't. That's like not the case at all. It's I cared about anti-Semitism back when I was like more of a liberal Zionist, and care about anti-Semitism now. It's just I just realized the most immediate danger and purveyor of anti-Semitism was the state of Israel. But yeah, I mean, people do see Hebrew writing on something, and just now there are people who just assume, oh, this is some Zionist
right.
shit, and that conflation is anti-Semitism, whether it's from the left or from the right.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter who's doing it; it's anti-Semitic. Um, the problem I have is that again, I see Israel as doing their damnedest to make sure that people do that conflation, because they make sure to call out any criticism of Israel anti-Semitic, which means you are conflating the two. That's it. You know?
yeah, and this brings me kind of to the next point that I wanted to talk about, which is Ethan Klein will talk about how if you're criticizing Israel, then you're kind of criticizing all Jews because 90% of the Jews
Right.
are like supportive
Because
of Israel.
a stat that I'm going to make up
Right,
is
exactly.
correct. Yeah.
And
Right.
then he'll say, well, and then he got really mad at Hassan when Hassan's like, oh, you should maybe talk to Sam Cedar because he has experience being an anti-Zionist Jew, and maybe he can talk you through kind of his life experience
Mm-hmm.
and also his experience being a very public outward-facing, like proud Jewish man. Maybe he can talk about
Hmm.
that. Um, and Ethan Klein really seems to think that whenever you bring up the idea that there are Jewish people that are standing against Israel, you are using them as a token, and
Right.
their Jewishness is utterly irrelevant when they are standing up against kind of all of the harm that Israel is doing, and being a
Right.
pro-Palestinian voice, and being like being a representative of Jewish people that are actually anti-Zionist. So, have
Hmm.
you experienced like any kind of pushback being like an outspoken anti-Zionist person?
I mean, have I experienced like pushback
Kind
from other Jews or just
from
in
like the
general?
standpoint that you are a token Jew, or
Oh,
like almost like
100%.
an anti Uncle Tom.
Yeah, 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 yeah. We get, I'm a capo. I'm a self-hating Jew. I'm an as a Jew. I'm a not a Jew. I'm like all that stuff. It's always funny because like um they, there's nothing gives away the game more than your relationship to how you fit into the Jewish community is based on what you think about Israel. Like
Mm,
like to me, it's like there was this article that Avi Mayer wrote in the Jerusalem Post, like post October 7th. Um, I don't know if he's their editor in chief, but I believe he's like high up in the you know, at the Jerusalem Post, and he
okay.
wrote a whole thing where his op-ed was, as much as it pains me to say, but I believe we need to excommunicate any Jews who are anti-Zionists. And it was this whole like fake, heart-wrenching, like, oh, I hate that's what we need to do, but that is what we need to do.
Wow.
And I'm like, and to me, I look at that and I'm like, okay, so this is pretty clear that what you are saying here essentially is that, um, first of all, support of a state supplants, the actual Talmud, which is like, if you're a religious Jew, that seems pretty sacrilege. Like, I believe
Right.
most rabbis would consider that to be treif. And then also, it's like a convenient way of saying all Jews support Israel, because as soon as you don't, then we will say you're not Jewish. And it's like, okay, so then your definition of Jew is just Zionist. That's it. That's your only
Yeah.
definition. If you're saying you want to excommunicate people from not just a religion but their ancestry, which is very funny to me. It's your way of saying that Zionism is the end all be all, number one, most Jewish thing there is, and everything else behind that is you know is conditional. So it is also a way of signaling unconsciously that one of their big fears is the existence of Jews who speak out against Israel. Um,
Yeah, that's a
in the
good point.
West, in the West specifically, there are plenty of Jews who speak out against Israel in Israel, but they exist within this, very particular system, and so a lot of the things they're speaking up about, is less about the apartheid and genocidal nature of Zionism, which is, the
Yeah.
ideology that created Israel and that they all live under. It's more about like, oh, left versus right, Supreme Court, powers versus executive powers, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But there are way way more harsh critiques of Israel that happen within Israel in the media class there, than that don't get covered. And the reason is that Israel and their hasbarists realize that it's the West that keeps Israel going. So they can't have Jews stepping outside of the narrative of we all support Israel. Like that, that's scary to them, because that is their number one tool, is convincing everyone in the diaspora who's Jewish that they that they are Israel is their homeland,
Right.
and so they can't have people believing that it's a separate thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting dynamic where you have the United States supporting this ethno state, and
Mhm.
it's almost a self-perpetuating machine, or like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you say
Right.
we must have an ethno state to defend ourselves,
Hmm.
uh, and then the fact that we do have an ethno state is causing so much of this violence, which is then
Hmm.
justifying the need to have an
Right.
ethno state. And then you
Hmm.
have the United States, which is like, okay, well, we're just going to support this client state that is in perpetual war, or like
Right.
perpetual turmoil.
Hmm.
It's a really interesting dynamic. And I don't know how much of an idealist you are, or how positive you are on the idea of Israel Palestine, but um, just have you been thinking about where you think this next 4 years underneath the Trump
Mm.
administration is going to leave us, or have you just been like, I prefer not to dwell on that at the moment?
I mean, I'm of like a few different minds when it comes to this. I am. It depends on what day you catch me. Some days I'm optimistic. Some days I'm pessimistic. The next 4 years, I'm not very optimistic about what is going to be happening within the Trump administration when it comes to Israel. I think they are all committed Zionists, but beyond that, Christian Zionists,
Yeah.
um, which is like an even more disgusting flavor of Zionism. It's a very American type of
Yeah.
Zionism
That
because it's
is,
yeah.
Christian Zionism is almost like you get to have your cake and eat it too, where you get to be discriminatory against Muslims and Jews at the same
Yes,
time.
exactly. Yeah, and you can they all pat themselves on the back because their criticisms they're critical. They get to be, racist towards uh Arabs and Muslims for the greater good of helping Israel, which is
Yes.
like it's perfect for them. They love it. It's like finally I have a religious reason to be a bigot, and then at the same time they also get to fulfill this like incredibly anti-Semitic prophecy in which all the Jews are forced to move to Israel, and then Jesus Christ comes back, and it's just like who's ready to die or whatever. That's
Right.
I believe Jesus's catchphrase in the Bible. Um, which one of you motherfuckers is ready to die? And then he kills all the Jews.
At the
I think it's
Last
like,
Supper.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Who's ready to die? I know I am.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but like, I'm obviously, not very sunny when it comes to the next 4 years. Um, but I will say the I've become a little bit more optimistic recently as the ceasefire has gone on.
Hmm.
I'm and seeing Gazans return back to the north, seeing the ceasefire, quote unquote, the prisoner exchange that is happening, um, and however much it's being impeded, people are going back to the
Right.
north. People are being reunited with their loved ones. Palestinians are getting out of these prisons, and these fucking Israel's filled with these gitmos essentially that are all exist outside of the law because the Palestinians are stateless people, so they can do whatever the
Yeah.
fuck they want with them. Um, and the reason that fills me with optimism is because if ever there was a moment to complete a rapid ethnic cleansing, like a real rapid Nakba,
Hmm.
um, this was the moment. And I'm not saying, of course, that won't happen. Um, I'm not foolish enough to think I can predict the future on this, but I will say that if there's one thing the Israeli people have shown is that they they can only live with so much bad press
Mm,
uh, before they all start fighting. And at the end of the day, you know, there will always be Palestinians in
yeah.
Gaza. There will always be Palestinians in the West Bank. Whether it's 2 million or 200,000, I don't know. Um, but to me, it means that it's all an eventuality when it comes to the freeing of Palestine,
Yeah.
because Israel has set themselves up for disaster because they have based the definition of Jewish state on ethno supremacy. And if that's your definition, if your definition of what makes something a Jewish state is about ethnic demographic control, um, you really, you only have one option. Or I guess you have two options. You either end that bullshit, or you do a Holocaust. You
Yeah.
do you do straight up fucking. I mean, you'd have to stop the Arab birth rate. You'd have to murder millions of people. And as craven as Israelis have proven themselves to be, at least Israeli soldiers, I don't know. I don't know if they have. I don't know if they have the guts I once thought that they might have. I mean, it seemed like it, but now more and more, I'm like, I think that there's one thing that Israel prides itself over, um, prides itself on over anything else. It's their narrative.
Mm,
It's their story,
that's a
and
good
it's
point.
being liked. And
Yeah.
they can pretend all they want that they don't give a shit what the world thinks. But if they didn't give a shit what the world thinks, they wouldn't be spending so much time and money trying to convince us that they invented the cherry tomato. You know what I mean? Like they wouldn't spend so much time and money um, uh, bragging about their shitty little AI startups. Like they care. They want to be a part of the regular ass international community, and that will never happen in as long as they are continuing to be an apartheid state. So they either got to you know so anyways, also what keeps me optimistic is reading anything about apartheid South Africa,
Mm,
um
that's
and
yeah.
and the end of apartheid, and also the beginning of apartheid, and just reading about the resistance. We talk about Palestinians not being a perfect victim, and it's like yeah, there are, there's never been perfect victims.
Right.
And you look at Nelson Mandela, and the people talk a lot about him being the head of the ANC, the African National Congress. But a lot of people forget that he was labeled a terrorist, and he was
Yeah.
a terrorist, quote unquote, by the definitions of the Western international
Right.
community, because he was the head of Umkhonto Wesizwe, which was like the military wing of the ANC. They were called the
Hmm.
Spear of the Nation, and he fucking founded it. He founded fucking I guess the African PLO, or the African Hamas, South African Hamas, whatever you want to call it. So there's no perfect anything. And I think if you in the 60s or the 70s would have said, oh yeah, that guy Nelson Mandela, who's in prison forever,
Right.
um is you told him he's gonna be the president of South Africa after apartheid, people would have been like, bullshit, that sounds insane. But it wasn't. It happened.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've been reading Nelson Mandela's writings lately,
Yeah.
and there is a lot that you can pick up from that. Um,
Yeah.
well, on that positive note, I'm going to let you go, but I really appreciate you coming on, and I think people should take to heart what you were talking about in terms of Israel caring about its image, and I think that's why doing what you do and what I'm like trying to do more of, and what
Hmm.
Hassan and people like Frogan, Kyle Kalinske, Majority Report, kind of just holding a light up to the war crimes that Israel is carrying out, the
Hmm.
flaws in their ideology, and just making it uncomfortable to be pro-Israel at this moment.
Yeah.
And I think that Donald Trump follows a similar urge to be liked and to not look negative in the public sphere.
Yeah.
So we'll see if we can have any kind of influence on that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's harder with Trump because Trump also, he is, uh, cruel by nature. So I think that
That's
his
true.
cruelty is always, I think,
He is fascinated by dictators, so there's
yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I have no optimism with him in particular, other than him being so egotistical that he um just out of spite for a slight that Netanyahu or someone in the Knesset does is like, he might accidentally free Palestine, but I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, he does have a record of spiting our allies.
Yes, he
So
does. But just real quick, I mean, I don't know if I fully. I hope you got what you needed with regards to Ethan. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll talk to other people about him. I don't know much about him, so I hope that
no,
I
yeah,
was useful in some sense.
I wanted to have a conversation with you mostly about Israel Palestine, and
Yeah,
I know like Ethan is a hot subject right now, but this conflict is bigger than Ethan. I've been
yeah,
using
yeah,
kind of the drama between Ethan and Hassan to be able
yeah.
to talk about Israel and Palestine
Yes,
and the issues
exactly.
there. So I
Yeah.
think that that's been like it's kind of almost just like a Trojan horse. We're like, oh, Ethan
No, of
Klein
course.
drama, and then people will show up and actually,
100%. 100%. But if you want to, I can just call him a bitch real quick.
oh
Like
yeah, give me that
if you need
soundbite.
a video of like uh here's the thing I think about Ethan Klein. He's a bitch. He's a bitch, and if I see him in public, oh, I swear to God, I'm just gonna say, hey, what the hell, man? um, no, he's a bitch. Fuck you. Hey, Ethan, if you're watching this, suck my dick.
All right, man. Well, Ethan's completely ignored my content for
Oh,
the entire 6 months that I've been doing this, but maybe
hell
this will
yeah.
get him to turn
Yeah,
an eye on to me. So,
that'll be funny.
all right.
All
Thanks
right,
so much for talking. This was a
no
blast.
problem. All right, take care, man.
Yeah, you too.